Well, I hope everybody so far had a great first day at the World Usability Congress. First of all, raise your hand if you learned something new today. And now raise your second hand if from the final keynote if you want to even gain more knowledge. And now let's bring him up on stage. When the talk is over, I'm going to give you a few information for what we're going to do tonight and for what is going to happen also tomorrow. Well, it's our final keynote of the day, of the first day of the full conference here at the World Usability Congress in Graz. We are happy to have you here. I know a few just arrived. We'll be here for tomorrow as well. So welcome to Graz for one final and last time. AI is a big topic, a big issue we have been dealing with in the last couple of years, but especially this year in 2025. So maybe we're going to get a little bit of insights into how to deal with it or how the world after AI is even going to look like. The world after AI, imagining human experience in an AI integrated future. Hosted by our final keynote today. Welcome on stage, Ramy Nassar.
The year's 1962. And we meet an animated family called the Jetsons. Does anyone remember the Jetsons? Okay, good, great. What was special about the Jetsons? Flying cars, yeah, but more generally, what was special about them? Rosie, General. Where were they from? The future. I once had somebody say Connecticut. The Jetsons were a family from the future. What made them so futuristic? Well, if you watch the pilot episode of the show, the phone rings at one moment in time. And as the phone rings, a flat screen TV comes down from the ceiling and they do a two-way video call on a flat screen color TV at a moment in time where most families may have just bought their first color television. The Jetsons imagined flat screen TVs integrated into our furniture, into our atmosphere, into our environment that could do two-way video calling. They were so ahead of their time. In a later episode, the young boy, Elroy, who you see sitting there, gets in trouble in school. Does anyone want to guess what he got in trouble for? A little bit louder. Using a mobile phone, very close. They didn't imagine mobile phones, but he gets in trouble for watching cartoons on his wristwatch. He's watching the Flintstones, actually. And yet, we live in a world today, almost 60 years later, more than 60 years later, where kids 2, 3, 4 years old can navigate an iPad to their favorite show, even though they can't read a single word on the screen. Most famously in the Jetsons, there's Rosie, the robot maid. And you might argue, yeah, but we don't have Rosie, but we do. We have robot mops and vacuums that can clean our floors. We have voice-controlled systems that can adjust the temperature, the lights, the settings in our swimming pool. And we have delivery services from Amazon to Uber and all these things that can bring almost anything you can imagine to your doorstep, sometimes even delivered with a robot flying drone in minutes. We are currently living in the world of the Jetsons. Let's go forward 25 years. I'm going to play you a video. The sound quality on the video is very bad. It's from 1987. It's a little bit to be expected, but I'm going to play it anyway for about 30 seconds here.
You have 3 messages. Your graduate research team in Guatemala, just checking in. Robert Jordan, a second semester junior, requesting a second extension on his term paper. And your mother reminding you about your father's
surprise birthday party next Sunday.
Today you have a faculty lunch at 12 o'clock.
I'll pause it there. In this video, Apple imagines a future device that they called Apple Navigator. This is a folding tablet screen with a avatar kind of humanoid character that can connect in real time with back and forth voice dialogue. Today we call it Siri. I just activated half of your phones in the room, I'm sorry. This video was published by Apple more than 20 years before the first generation iPhone was released. Again, they imagined the future. One more date to share with you, 2009. A Canadian science fiction author named Robert Sawyer publishes a series of 3 books, the WWW trilogy. And in these books, he imagines that an AI has emerged, has awoken on the internet, not one created by Microsoft or OpenAI or any private company, but one that just came into sentience through the underlying fabric of our computer systems. It's a young girl, 12, 13 years old, who is the first one to discover this thing, and she becomes friends with this AI. Now, in the second book, which is called Watch, something really interesting happens. The evil Americans come along, and the NSA hears about what's happening with this AI, and they decide to try to shut it down because they're terrified about it from a security threat perspective. So she tells the AI, you need to tell the world that you exist for good, for the good of humanity. So it goes away and thinks for a moment, like maybe 5 minutes, and it decides to research cancer. The AI reads every journal article, every academic study, every clinical drug trial ever done in human history about cancer. It reads all of that information, brings it all together, and that night it hacks into the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Globe and Mail, every newspaper in the world, so that the next morning, everyone on Earth wakes up to the same headline on their local newspaper: a simple, singular cure for cancer. Now, what I think the author is trying to get at with that is not that AI will cure cancer, or that there is a simple cure for cancer, but he's trying to ask us to imagine, what if we, humans, had already solved it, and we just didn't notice because no one could parse through that amount of information? This is so much data that if everyone in this room spent nothing but the rest of your lives, 16 hours a day, reading information, all of us together, we still, over the course of our lifetimes, could not completely read all of this information, but a computer can. Fast forward 15 years from when these books are written, and we are now today living in the world where you literally have those tools available and at your fingertips, in your pockets, on your wristwatches. That's the world that we're in today. It's a world that we have imagined over the past 5, 6 decades, all coming together. So what I'd like to do over the next 36 or so minutes before we all go for dinner together is look at storytelling, look at science fiction, and see how far into the future we can extrapolate some of this and have a little bit of fun. I will promise you almost no practical takeaways from today, so if you're hoping for like 5 trips for prompt engineering, I'm sure there's many, many sessions here about that. What I'd like to do is have you extend your imagination a little bit and think differently about the role technology will play for creative leaders, for usability leaders, for designers over the coming years, maybe even over the coming decades. So, my name is Ramy. I live from Canada. I love coming here. I am a futurist, I guess. I write some books. I spend most of my time these days traveling around the world, giving presentations to organizations and associations about the changing role of technology in how we live, work, and play. And it won't seem like it at all points in time, but I am an optimist. I do think that there is more potential for good when it comes to technology than there is risk of harm, but we have to be aware of those risks, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. In a past life, I had a real job. At one point, I ran innovation for Mattel. My whole life was Barbies and Hot Wheels. It was a really fun time. And probably more relevant, I'm officially, as of 2 years ago, a UX Knight. I believe my... In fact, what is not fair in our world is that this photograph is 10 years old. Hannes looks identical, and I have a lot less hair than I did 10 years ago. But it's actually exactly 10 years since my first time at the World Usability Congress, and I think it's my 5th or 6th time presenting, so I'm really happy to be here with you. So with that, let's start at the beginning. And the first act of this story is to understand the world of technology as it exists today. I would invite you to share some thoughts for a moment here, because I actually want to hear your perspective, or at least see your perspective. So you know what to do. You see the QR code. You're all reaching for your phones. I didn't have to tell you. I'll move out of the way. If you're sitting too far back, you can either go to menti.com and type in the code, or you can come take a seat in the front row. I think I'll know which choice you will make. And I see most of you put your phones down. If you missed it, you can still go up the URLs at the top. My question to you, as you think about the next years or even decades, what is a what-if question with respect to technology that we should be asking of ourselves as design leaders, as strategic leaders? What are these questions that we're asking but maybe we're not? Or we should be asking but we're not focused on because we're too focused on the day-to-day, the practical, the implementable. I know it's a big question. You can take a moment. And it does not have to be about AI. Please, we're imagining today a world beyond AI, a world after AI, so it doesn't have to do that. What if AI takes our jobs too late? It has already started. What if most humans are not needed as a working force anymore? Clearly have a theme happening here. What if we could connect AI neurally to our meat brains? I especially like that visceral description of our brains made out of meat. I'll scroll down a little bit here just to see. Obviously, we don't have time. What if the technology takes over? What if we don't matter anymore? What if some people are left behind? There's a very clear theme developing here. There's only about 50 answers. What if everyone becomes more stupid? I mean, grammatically, that sentence sounds like it might have been written by ChatGPT. But it's an important question, and we'll talk specifically about that. I'm going to convince you that that's not the right word for it, but it is a risk that we need to think about. Just for fun, I'll run a language model on top of your answers, at least the ones submitted so far, and we'll have a look at some of the core themes, because I'm pretty sure it'll be quite obvious what the themes are. AI control, a screenless future, societal collapse, oh boy. We're getting dark. Human cognition, couple more themes: natural disconnect or nature disconnect, resource use. Really interesting to talk about that. So we'll touch on all of these themes as we go on. The question I would propose as my what-if question is, what if we're too busy developing these technologies, developing these tools, that we are not focused on the right skills, talents, and capabilities in both yourselves and the people that you lead in your teams? What are the skills that will be needed in the world of tomorrow? What are the superpowers that design and creative leaders have? I think there are three. The first and probably most important is curiosity, asking why. If you have forgotten how to do this, have a 3-year-old like I do. They are very, very good at asking why and why and why, but that is an important skill. In fact, I would argue it is the single most important skill. It is what ensures that when we are relying on these technologies, we don't just assume that they are right. Has anyone here ever, and you do not have to put your hand up because your boss might be in the room, used a tool like ChatGPT and copy and pasted the results of it into an email, a Teams message, a PowerPoint document? I see some of you smiling and nodding, even though you're not supposed to put your hands up and volunteer the information. The question is, did you ask yourself how it got to that answer, why it came to that answer, what underlying biases or assumptions might be built into that answer? Related to that is imagination. I hope to stretch your imagination today, especially as we look at the world 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe even 75 years from now. And then the third one is critical thinking. And I know they're all related to one another, but how do we really take that skeptic, critical mindset when we use these tools? And it's not just AI I'm talking about. Any advanced technology has the ability to be inseparable from magic. And as these tools and technologies start to resemble magic, what is the underlying critical thinking we use to leverage them and to understand what they do? So in terms of critical thinking, one of the most important skills to me is the ability to anticipate change in the future. That's what futurists do. That's what foresight and strategic leaders do. They understand what the future might look like, but it's really, really hard. There's reasons you can get a graduate degree, a PhD in foresight. First of all, we tend to anchor to the present. We tend to assume the future will look like today, and that's because change happens slowly. We are in the middle of change at any moment in time, and it becomes really hard to step out of that change to see that it's happening. The second is that the future unfolds unevenly, and it's best said by William Gibson, another science fiction author. You'll notice a science fiction theme throughout today when he speaks about this idea of uneven futures. And I'll give you a great example of that. What year did we start having Skype available to us for video calling? Any guesses? 2005, very good guess. It was 2003. What year did it become, let's say, very commonplace to use video calling in a professional setting for meetings? You all said it, 2020. 17 years after we had that technology freely available to us, it became mainstream. And of course, we all know 2020, COVID, pandemic, it forced us to change. The future is here, it's just not distributed evenly. So sometimes we have these technologies and there's a trigger event that makes them sort of tip over, as Malcolm Gladwell would say. The third one is that we underestimate the impact of change over the long run. And again, I'm going to refer to someone much smarter than me. Roy Amara very famously pointed out that we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short run, but underestimate in the long run. What does this mean? Let's take another example, smartphones. I worked at BlackBerry in the year where, and I was in the room when the year where Jim Balsillie, the co-CEO of BlackBerry, said to the entire organization, why would anyone want a camera in their smartphone? And you sort of laugh and you giggle at it now, right? We don't even own cameras anymore, most of us, unless you're a professional photographer. And yet, at that moment in time, he wasn't wrong. The camera was a liability in high security environments. What he missed, what the organization missed, what the world missed, was the fact that we would all become addicted to these 3-inch rectangles that we carry with us day in and day out. Again, please do not put up your hand. I don't actually want to know, but ask yourself, have you ever taken a smartphone into the washroom with you? It's a weird behavior to do. If you go back 20 years and you tell someone in 2005 that in 20 years from now, we will be so addicted to these little devices that we will go into the washroom and use them while we are taking care of ourselves, that would seem like a very strange thought. It's because we underestimated just how integrated our lives would be with these devices and with the internet. So if you believe in Amara's Law, which has applied to smartphones, to the internet, to electricity itself, and you apply that same thinking to artificial intelligence, we are currently in a moment in time where it is obnoxiously overhyped. Half the presentations this week are probably about AI or mentioning AI, maybe even more than half. But the takeaway from Amara's Law tells us that the more something is overhyped, the more we overestimate in the short term, the greater the impact might be in the long term. So in fact, all of this hype, this moment, this potential bubble we are living in about AI is actually a signal that it's going to change everything about how we live, work, and play in the coming years from now. So I want to ask you one more question. I promise this is the last one. If you still have your rectangle, of course you do, we're all addicted to them. I want to know in a word or two, what is the technology that you can think of, and you can't just write AI, please, I don't want to see AI up here, that we overhyped, but has since become, or might become, in the future transformational and truly disruptive. And I give everyone a moment. VR, and AR is the next one, very interesting. Selfies is a really interesting kind. I've never thought of it that way. There was a moment in time where you had to hold a camera facing away from yourself, or kind of away from the screen, right, to take a picture of yourself, and that's where the name came from, until someone said, what if we put the camera on the front of the device, or the screen on the same side? Social media right in the middle there. Video analytics, mixed reality. I'm not going to read you all of these, but really interesting to see some of these themes coming up. Games, cars, TikTok. Oh, TikTok. I'm surprised online payments is small and online commerce, e-commerce, is actually not bubbling up more, but maybe as I say that, all of you are writing it in. I want you to see not just how you're thinking about this, but how your peers in the room are thinking about it. So let's move to the second act of the story. And by the way, to the organizing crew, I don't actually have a timer running. It still says 40 minutes. Maybe you want to update it with a rough approximation of the actual time. Hannah says just keep going. No dinner. In this second act, let's talk a little bit about where the technology is headed. The first thing I want us to think about is the potential hidden costs of artificial intelligence and related technologies. The hidden price of things that get easy. Someone earlier said, how do we not, and I'm going to try to quote it, become more stupid? Earlier this year, a group of students at the MIT Media Lab did a very interesting experiment. They brought in people to write essays on common topics, kind of general knowledge topics. And they put them into 3 cohorts. One cohort had to write it without any access to external resources. One cohort could search on Google, and a third cohort could use ChatGPT. As they were writing these essays, their brains were being monitored via electroencephalogram, the EEG, to monitor for brain activity in real time. Not surprisingly, the brain activity looked very different and was drastically reduced cohort to cohort, those who were writing with ChatGPT having the least sort of creative brain activity going on. That probably doesn't surprise you. When asked about their essays afterward, that same cohort did the poorest in even summarizing what the essay that they supposedly themselves had written was about or recalling any quotes from it. In fact, in one of the subtests that they did, they would read to each participant in the study 2 different quotes and say, which one of these came from what you wrote? And more often than not, it was about 50-50, but they got 2 choices. Essentially, they didn't even know what they had written, even though they had read it themselves. Because they did not write it themselves, it was fully augmented. But what was crazy was they brought those same people back weeks later for subsequent testing. And then they started to mix things up. What they started to do, and by the way, this background images are actual real images of some of the brain scans of what were going on during that. They brought the same group back in, and they would have the group that previously used ChatGPT now write an essay on the same topic without it. And they wrote measurably poor quality of work. So it meant, or at least the hypothesis is, that the changes in the brain chemistry and in the brain structures and the pathways was actually a permanent or a semi-permanent change. It wasn't just a real-time decrease in brain activity, it had changed how they think. The results of the study were so stark that rather than going through a traditional peer review process, they actually released the results prior to publishing the work formally, because they felt that they had an ethical responsibility to tell the participants in the study, especially those who were in the ChatGPT groups, of the potential harm that they had caused them. Now, if you go to the MIT Media Labs group on this topic, the headline in there says, please do not interpret it as people are getting dumber or that we are getting dumber. That is an oversimplification of this, and they caution people like me in referring to the study to not do the same. They will say that it is early, it was a small cohort, it was only 54 participants, and additional work is needed. But the real takeaway to me is it is changing how we think. This is the price we pay for easy. And so this over-reliance weakens our ability to recall, to understand, and to reason, to think creatively and challenge. So the role of designers is going to change. We need to design for intelligence amplification, not for replacement of our intelligence. And that is a very challenging thing to do. I'm going to give you one way you can do that. Has anyone here ever worked on, and you can put your hands up this time because it's maybe a good thing, on a design or a system or user experience where one of the criteria you were looking for was frictionless, or you talked about a frictionless experience? Cool, about half of you. I'm going to try to convince you that that's in some cases a bad thing, and that friction is one of our most powerful design tools. If we think about how we introduce friction into our systems, we can give moments for pause, give moments for reflection, give moments for critical thinking, and that is how we get from lip service about things like human in the loop to real, tangible implementations of human in the loop. And I'll give you a real-world case study, something I'm building right now with one of my clients. I do a lot of work in clinical trials, and in this world, without going into the details of it, there's a certain process where you have to create 12 testing scripts. And the first attempt we had at automating that process, we built a system and it created all 12 scripts. And then we had the user validate those scripts at the end. And what we found was a lot of errors. So what we did is we reimagined it, and we did two specific things. The first was we introduced friction into the process. Instead of getting all 12 of your scripts automatically, you get one. And after you get the one, you have to write the words, I approve. And by the way, the system is so specific that if you misspell it, like I did in a demo in front of our CEO, if you misspell the word approve, it does not accept it. The idea is, let's go one at a time, let's bring friction and pause and reflection into the process before we move on, before we automate everything. We can still take a process that goes from taking 2 days to taking an hour, but we don't have to go from 2 days to 2 minutes. The second thing we did is we brought in accountability. We built an audit log directly into the tool so that the user's actions are actually being logged. And I'm sneaky. When you get this script, what is happening in the background is a word count is done on how many words are in the script. The time from when the generation of that script is done, this is a test script, like a user acceptance testing script. The time at which the generation is completed is stamped, and the time when you write the words I approve is stamped. We then take 5 times the standard human reading speed. We calculate, assuming someone kind of skims it over at 5 times the human reading speed, that's our limit. And if your amount of time that between the generation being done and you writing I approve is faster than that, it actually flags it with a warning that says, this person probably didn't actually read it. Friction and accountability are the ways we can start to build systems that become more trustworthy. It balances efficiency with understanding. These are some of the methods you can start thinking about. And they're going to get harder and harder to do as these systems get better because you'll be tempted. If you had to write an essay now and I told you you can either do it with or without ChatGPT, which would you choose? But in order to keep our minds sharp, in order to ensure that we can trust the outcomes of our work, we have to think about friction. We have to think about accountability. So what might it look like in a world after AI? What are some of the underlying technologies that we'll be talking about in 5 years at this forum, maybe in 10 years and 15 years? I want to share with you 3 of them. The first one is sort of a combination of both spatial and ambient computing. And I'll go into each one of these in details. The second is neuromorphic computing, and the third is quantum computing. So let's start about spatial and ambient computing. What happens when we stop designing for screens? What happens when we stop designing for rectangles? And we've always designed for rectangles. There are big monitors, and there are flat screen displays, then there are phones. I have 10 minutes left? Oh, okay, well, we better speed this up because we didn't even get to the good part. That's why a counter is nice. What happens when the world becomes the interface? That's what spatial and ambient computing is about. Projection mapping is one of the really neat examples, and I want to show you what that actually might look like. I'm going to show you that in a moment. The second, because I want to get to these underlying technologies so we can look ahead to the future. Neuromorphic computing. The computer chips of today have not changed in 50 or 60 years. We did not design the computer chips of today to do AI. In fact, the proof of that is that we use GPUs, graphics processing units. Pieces of hardware made for playing video games turn out to be really good at doing AI calculations. Neuromorphic computing is a new architecture of hardware that is based on essentially emulating neurons in our brains in hardware that will become lower energy use significantly and more inherently available or able to do AI-type calculations. The outcome of neuromorphic computing is that these systems will inherently learn from the environment around them. They will use far less energy. In fact, this is a part of the solution to the energy crisis facing the world of AI, the environmental impact of these tools. Then there's one more we have to talk about quickly. Does anyone have a coin in their hand? I'm going to skip the audience example, but does anyone have, what sides do you have on your coin? What are the names of the 2 sides? Heads and tails. A coin is either, does anyone disagree with me that a coin is either heads or tails? About right. You, put your hand up. Tell me why you disagree. It could land on its head. Great idea. So imagine a coin spinning on its side. Is that heads or tails? In the world of quantum computing, it's both. Computers are built on bits, ones and zeros. Quantum computers are built on qubits. A probability that it is either a 1 or a 0. It can be both at the same time, and I know that hurts your brain to say, how can something be two things at once? You just have to sort of believe that it's possible. And it's in that possibility that the power of quantum computing arises. It's in that idea of superposition, that's the scientific name for that, that we are able to explore all possibilities of a problem at once. I'll give you an example. A protein is made up of amino acids. A medium-sized protein is made up of about 100 amino acids. Proteins fold in our bodies. A protein with about 100 amino acids can fold in approximately 10 to the 143 ways. You don't understand how big that number is. It's more than the atoms of the known universe. If we had a supercomputer that could do 1 billion calculations per second, and we started that supercomputer at the time of the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, it would today still not be done calculating all the ways the protein could fold. But a quantum computer will solve this problem in seconds because it explores all possibilities at the same time. You might be thinking, you've probably heard, yes, but we will never have quantum computers in our homes. Guess what? In 1977, the president of DEC, one of the biggest computer companies in the world at the time, said famously, I can't imagine a world in which someone would need a computer in their home. We have them in our homes, in our pockets, in our wrists, and in our bodies now. And so maybe we'll have quantum computers at home, maybe we won't, but that's not the point. All of these technologies are going to impact us in the coming years. And they are advancing at speeds that you cannot imagine right now. So over the coming years, as we think about this, there's a moment in time, actually, that we just hit, July 2nd of this year. July 2nd, we got closer to the year 2050 than we are to the year 2000. So with that, I want to, over the next 3 minutes, talk to you about the years 2030, 2040, and 2050. In the year 2030, I hope it's the moment in time we start closing the lids on our computers and thinking about ambient computing, thinking about lack of interfaces. One of my favorite examples of this is a former MIT Media Lab student named Pranav Mistry, who imagined something called Sixth Sense. He paired a microprojector that he wore around his neck with a camera that could interpret the world around him. And he imagined scenarios like this, holding a paper boarding pass that gets interpreted by the camera, looks up online that flight status, and then projects the delay directly onto that ticket. He has videos where he's holding up a newspaper with real-time, at this moment in time, weather all across the country over top of the map, or video playing it within a newspaper. This idea of ambient computing and using every surface around us for interaction is really interesting, and over the coming 5 years, I think we'll see more of that. As we approach the year 2040, we'll start seeing empathy as a currency. We'll get into this era where we start building empathy directly into the systems. Neuromorphic computing will be a big, big part of that. But we will start dealing with systems with which we build relationships. And the early signs are there. 1.9% of ChatGPT users right now are using it for kind of personal therapy or personal problem resolution. And just yesterday, OpenAI announced that they are going to allow the use of adult use cases within ChatGPT, including erotic and sensual use cases. I think we're actually heading to this world much faster than 2040. I want to share with you one more data point, the year 2050. 2050, and I'm going to play you an audio clip.
The year is 2029. The machines will convince us that they are conscious, that they have their own agenda worthy of our respect. They'll embody human qualities. They'll claim to be human, and we'll believe them.
They'll claim to be human and we'll believe them. Now, he says 2029. That is a quote from the 1999 book by Ray Kurzweil, one of the most famous futurists of all time, and a Canadian rock band actually got him, that's his voice, to record it as part of an album they released that same year. But this idea of consciousness, in the next 25 years, we will be unable to distinguish between human biological consciousness and machine consciousness. And we need to start thinking about what that means to us. Because I know it's a scary thought, but we are going to get there, and we're in that pot of water that's boiling around us. That's why we can't see it happening. But the early signs and signals of it are already there. And so the year 2100, I don't know what it's going to happen. I think that a couple of interesting things might happen, but most fantastically. I'll refer to the work of Liu Cixin, a Chinese science fiction author who wrote my favorite book of all time, The Three-Body Problem. And in this book, he imagines a future civilization where intelligence is built into the universe, into the fabric of the universe. He imagines something called a sophon, a subatomic particle that is intelligent. Programming computers at the subatomic level. And that might seem completely fantastical, but we do it at the molecular level now. We edit DNA. We use CRISPR-Cas9 to change how genetics work and do gene editing. This is the next level of that. We might be 10 years away from this, we might be 100 years away from this, we might be 1,000 years away from it. My goal is not to get to a solution of when the universe around us starts to think, but I want to leave you with one last date, but it's not in the future. Thou shalt not make, that's just a recap. 1965, Frank Herbert publishes a book called Dune. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of the human mind. What the book Dune is about, and many of you have seen the movie or the TV series about it, but the story of Dune takes place 10,000 years after a great world war. But it's actually not a war between warring countries or warring planets. It's a war between humans and what they call thinking machines. 60 years ago, someone had the imagination to think about essentially AI, we didn't call it that, but he called it thinking machines, and imagine a world where humans go to war against these thinking machines. And ultimately, the spoiler, humans win, and the reason that you have the Bene Gesserit, the reasons you have mentats, these sort of human supercomputers in the story of Dune, is because humanity spent the next 10,000 years not building machines, but trying to advance human capabilities. And that's the really cool part, at least to me, of that story. But 60 years ago, he imagined a world that warrants the same things we are worried about today. So my challenge to you, my closing thought to you is, if 60 years ago Frank Herbert imagined a world of humans against machines, what would the literature, what would the science fiction of today tell us about the world of tomorrow? Thanks, everyone.
Well, that's a very long applause. Can we get that's a very long applause that we're getting for you here, Ramy. Thank you very much for your final keynote of day number 1. And you would have had 30 seconds left. Yeah. Anything you want to still add? For how many times have you been here? 3 times? 4 times? 6 times already. You're getting another applause for this.